computer. So hopefully nobody minds. So yeah, photography and camera settings 101. So this is only really part of the session. There's going to be a few more because you can't fit it all in. And I used to have this thing of you could do 2 hours and do everything, and you could watch people's ears explode as blood started boiling out because it's just too much to take in. And the whole point of this is to do it in bite-sized chunks and to give everyone homework at the end of it for next time. Because I think, you could try and rush through all this and people just don't get it, don't understand it. You need to have a play with it and maybe come back with some questions at the end. So we'll see where we get to next session, where we're going to have a look at some of the results of the homework. So what is it we're here for? What is it we're trying to do, he says. Let me get the mouse in the right window. There you go. And the objective really is to bring the science and the art together to make it understandable for everyone. What settings you use, why do you use them? I'm not going to go into specific cameras. If we need to do that, we can certainly do it. But certainly at a basic level, we all have 80% of the same settings with some odd things that happen in cameras. And the idea really is to be confident in any situation to get the shot you want. And I think that's always the challenge is on any given day, the light's different. And, we have a certain member who the first question that gets asked is, what were your settings? And of course, they're looking for that magic set of settings that gives the perfect picture every time. And the reality, of course, is that doesn't exist. It's all down to the conditions on the day, but also what picture you're trying to achieve. And the first piece of that, if you want to call it that, is the exposure. Is it bright enough? Is it dark enough? Is it the right amount? And it's certainly at the root of why we have, the three settings, if you want to call it. It's commonly referred to as the exposure triangle. So we'll start at the top. So ISO, the amount of amplification of the signal of the sensor, because the sensor's an electronic light meter, really. It's just reading the light and listening to the light. And you can turn up the power and the gain on it. And we'll come back to what that means in a moment. We, of course, have the aperture. How big is the hole in the front of the lens? And then the piece we're really going to cover in the greatest deal is shutter, although I am going to start with ISO because it's kind of important. And that, how quickly does the shutter open or slow shutter controls how much light we get. So the aperture will create things like bokeh for portraits. So if you shoot wide open, you'll get a nice blurry background like Leslie's got artificially done by the camera there in the background. And we all like that effect, but sometimes that's not appropriate. Sometimes it's about making landscape pictures sharp from front to back. Macro and all kinds of other things have challenges with aperture. Today's going to be about creating blur when you want blur, getting rid of it when you don't want it, and of course freezing action as appropriate for the subject. So it's really about starting to take control of what the camera is doing while you're taking pictures. And we are going to start with the ISO just to sort of give everyone a flavour of why it's important as we go through, because it creates that ability to be a little bit more flexible than if you didn't have it and only had f-stop and shutter. In the old days, if anybody had film, your ISO or ASA, that was what you put in the camera and you were stuck with it whether you liked it or not. So if you put 400 ASA film and then you went out in super bright conditions, you'd be struggling to kind of manage it properly. And of course, conversely, if you put 100 ISO ASA in and then went indoors and did a party, you'd be struggling in the dark. So we now with the digital world have the ability to adjust it as we go, and that does create a lot of flexibility. And the reality is what we're trying to get to is the correct, image exposure. What do we want from it? And I guess the question for all of you is there really only one correct exposure? Anybody want to be brave and chip in?
Depends on whether you want to go for high key, low key, whatever key, etc.
Yep. So, and not even just that, but you're right. Sometimes you might want it dark. Sometimes you might want it bright. But sometimes there might be a particular set of settings that you're trying to achieve. And with a modern camera, it may still be, shall we call it, perfectly exposed, if there is anything, based on what you wanted to achieve. Because the reality is, these are all the same. So if you're going to shoot at 1/60th of a second at f8, and that's the correct exposure, you also can do f1.4, 1/1000th of a second.
Garages are such an incredible luxury. They can be really, really useful, but also they're a danger. If you do not give a garage a purpose, they can be just shoved full of everything.
Someone on the telly.
Solomon cleans the house.
Yeah.
I think you got the telly on, mate.
Okay.
You're watching it.
You yourself, or
Yeah, I've got another room.
yeah,
Cheers.
you're in. Well done. So, you know, each one of these green boxes is effectively the same amount of light hitting the sensor, assuming we're not changing the ISO or anything like that. So you can be flexible in what you're actually setting, and it will still be correct. It will still be the same amount of light hitting the sensor. So, you know, f16 at 1/15th of a second. Now, you might need a tripod for that, of course, at 1/15th of a second. Although these days, with in-camera body stabilization, etc., you can actually hand hold that. So this gives you the flexibility to actually get creative of what is the one that I want based on what I'm trying to achieve. And that's really what we're going to talk about tonight, is why they're different, why you might want to use one of these versus a different one. Is really what it's all about. Feel free to chip in, ask questions, you know, make a comment. Well, there's no right or wrong answers. The whole point of this is it's interactive and it isn't just me talking at you all. So what do I mean by flexibility of that? So the reality, of course, is, you know, on the left side there, you know, f2.8, everyone knows, is the lens, you know, generally with a great big aperture, lets in loads of light. So you've got, you know, fantastic amount there. And as you go down the numbers, so down to like f16, you get less and less light as the hole in the front is smaller. Let me move that out of the way, and it might not show up on the slides. Let's see if that works. And on the right hand side, of course, the slower your shutter speed, the more light you let into the sensor, and of course the faster it is, the less light. But of course it is almost like a sort of a bit of a trapezoid kind of thing going on here, is that I can actually change my settings. So I can go from f11 to f4 because I want a faster shutter speed. And they will, you know, if I go 1, 2, 3 stops on the left, I've gone 1, 2, 3 stops on the right. It's exactly the same. There's no difference. And the amount of light hitting the sensor is still the same, because, you know, it's the same amount of light let in by both elements. And of course, the reality is sometimes, you know, you might think, well, actually, if I was at f11, 1/60th of a second might not be enough. That might be too slow a shutter speed. So of course I can do things like, but how do I get a bit faster? So I could do things like, if I adjust my ISO by 1 stop to ISO 200, so it's always 1, 2, 4, 8. So it always doubles every time. We go from a 60th to a 1/125th. Maybe that's enough. Maybe what I really want is 1/500th of a second. And then we would have to go to ISO 400 would take me to 2/50th. ISO 800 would take me to 1/500th of a second. But I would still be at f11. Now I might want that because I want, you know, a great depth of field, but all of it is adjustable. Does that kind of make sense for everyone? Anyone got any questions on that?
No.
Good. So it's, you know, it's physics. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't make, you know, the line change for you. You can't make it say, actually, what I really want is, can we just sort of go there? Because the reality is the relationship between the two, as soon as you try to break it, you can't do so. The ISO will have to do something odd or strange to do that. And you may not get a perfect exposure. You may end up with something that's very odd or different, that you don't want. So when we say this ISO thing, what do we mean by that? What does it really mean? And you can think of it like an old gramophone, and that always makes me think of the is it not the 9 o'clock news sketch with the gentleman trying to buy a gramophone in a modern record store? Maybe I'm old and no one else remembers it, with Griff Rhys-Jones and Rowan Atkinson and whatever you, and they're taking the mickey out of him. Does he need a tweeter or not? But you know, we all know the old record player, you turn the volume up and of course it all gets a bit noisy, doesn't it? The beautiful, quiet, delightful sound was wonderful, and as soon as you started cranking it up, it starts getting all the shh and the hiss and the crackles and everything else, and your sensors just the same. You know, each little diode that's reading the light, if you start turning up the electrical signal to it, so you're, if you like, amplifying the signal, unfortunately, you also get a load of other junk with it. And so the reality is, as soon as you start changing from ISO, you know, 100 or a low value all the way up to, you know, these days, I regularly shoot at ISO 6400 and I don't even worry about it. But, you know, you end up at ISO 25600, you're going to get a pretty grainy picture because it just doesn't work very nicely. And you know, and I said that increasing the ISO beyond question mark, that's camera specific. So some cameras are really good at it and they really don't care and they'll work absolutely perfect. Some cameras have a terrible issue that if you underexpose your image and then try and brighten it afterwards, you'll get an awful lot more noise coming into the picture, and they vary dramatically. Some of the Sonys, you could underexpose by 5 stops, turn it up, and it doesn't care. Some of the Canons really don't like it at all. You know, 1 or 2 stops under, and the noise starts to become obnoxious, I think is a good word. You don't like it. It really doesn't work, and it's not a nice thing to get. So what do I mean by noise? So this is an old slide, but I haven't had time to breathe, let alone create a new version of it. So this was my old 5D3. ISO 400 looks all right, doesn't it? There's no real speckly bits going on. Everything looks okay. Yeah, okay, 3200. And start to look in the background areas and in that foreground area. Look at the difference. Look at the grain that is really starting to appear. At that kind of speed, you'd probably be okay. It would probably clean up well enough. But then if you go to ISO 16000, look at the grain in that area here and in the background there. If that was in your picture, and the piece that I always hated with the 5D3 is look how many colours there are starting to appear of red and green. And so you not only do you have speckly noise, but you also have colour noise starting to appear. And the reality, of course, is that might be okay. It might not be okay. It really depends what the shot is for, you know, and what you're trying to achieve with it. So let me show you a real world example. So, Julie will know exactly where this is. So this is at Surrey's a long while ago, and the light during the day as you're shooting, the stadium on the left-hand side, the one on the right there, you can see is bathed in light. So if they're on the right-hand side of the pitch, you get a lovely exposure. There's loads of light. You can have a really fast shutter speed. But as soon as you come over onto the left-hand side, you're in the shade of their kind of clubhouse. Does that picture look okay? Is it all right, do we think? Does it work all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, looks all right, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
not too bad.
Yeah.
It's fine. You
Well,
know,
apart from the composition of the content.
yeah, I know. But we're talking about the noise. We're talking about the noise. No, he's scoring the try. I've got the try. Come on. But yeah, the rest,
Nice try.
you know, it's just not good enough. But the picture looks okay. You could get away with it on Facebook. You could get away with it in a presentation like this where it's not too big on the screen. The problem is, as soon as you actually crop in, that's horrible. Look at all the grain on his skin. Look at his face. It's all speckly and horrible. So sometimes you could get away with it. But if it's in a club competition and it's 8 foot square up on the wall, or you print that out, whoever looks at that's going to see it a mile off. It's going to be really obnoxious. Now, I will say, I don't think I did much to this. I actually may have brightened this a little bit, which may have made it worse. But I certainly didn't do any denoise to it on purpose because I wanted to show what all this sort of nasty grain was. And it does you know, really degrade the quality of the picture. Some older sensors do things like the contrast reduces, the color accuracy or the quality of the colors degrades. I used to have an old 7D, and that would start to go horrible at like 800 ISO. You'd look at it and think, where did all the colors go? It looks like a really drab grey day, and it would just start to wash it out, and so it really wasn't pleasant. Of course, noise reduction over the last few years has got insanely crazy, as they say. Things like the new AI version of Lightroom, which does only use your own pixels. It's not a generative one. Topaz, lots of people use. I've got that as well, and it works pretty well. ON1, and there's lots and lots of other solutions. I didn't want to go through all of them. And I'm going to apologize for this. I have a mini LED monitor. It doesn't matter what that means. It's got lots and lots of backlights. And for some reason, the snipping tool and Lightroom, it doesn't like my mini LED screen, and it does some very odd things with the highlights, which is completely bizarre. So ignore those. But look at the noise reduction, and the difference in the background is dramatic. And this is, I think it's 4000 ISO in a wood underneath. But the piece for me is, look at the speckly detail back under there in the wings, in the feathers, and then look at it there. It's actually cleaned it up pretty decently. And it's not gone all waxworky or you know, lost all of the detail in there. So that was Lightroom. And then for some reason, Topaz seems to come out darker when I do the snipping tool. And so it's definitely something to do with the mini LED, but I don't quite know why. But look at the difference again between, you know, the background and you know, the way that it's, you know, reduce the noise into a much better state. But I would say, I don't think this did as nice a job on the feathers as Lightroom did. Yes, no?
No.
No.
I don't know, turn up the brightness a bit and we'll tell you.
Yeah, sorry, it's yeah, it's this mini LED thing with the
We're not comparing like with like.
Yeah, I've never seen it do that before. It's very odd. But you get the point. Look at the difference of the feather detail. I think here is definitely better than it is in there. I think it certainly preserved the details more effectively, which I think is really important. You know, the noise reduction as it used to be 2 years ago, you make everyone look like a waxwork dummy, and all of the pictures become very painterly as all of the detail is removed from all of this, you know, in really critical and important, you know, small details. Of course, you know, you might put it up because it allows you to shoot in a lower light situation, for sure. You might not have a tripod. It could be a moving subject where the shutter speed is absolutely critical, because it isn't necessarily about what you want your shutter speed to be. Sometimes it's down to what the subject you're shooting is, and we're going to get to this in the next section. And then, of course, it does allow you that greater flexibility of settings to be able to get the shot that you want. And of course, you know, generally low ISO is low noise, and you can use that in good light. It's great, you know, ISO 100 if you can, and the world's a wonderful place. But of course, we live in England, and so half the time it's grey, drab. You know, there's not a huge amount of light, and you have to start winding up that ISO a little bit higher when the light's not there. As I said, some cameras are worse than others. Underexposing, then brightening can make it worse. So, you know, some people say, well, just underexpose it and edit it afterwards. That can work, certainly on things like Sony's. I think do a pretty decent job of it. The modern Nikons, which are Sony sensors anyway, I'm not sure what an Olympus or a Micro Four Thirds would do, but I know Canon's not very good at doing that. It does seem to fall over a little bit. But as we saw from the rugby picture, you know, if it's only for a Facebook page or, you know, a small element, then sometimes it's fine to be a little bit noisy, a little bit grainy. You'll get the shot. But of course, you know, projecting it big, printing it at high quality are absolutely going to make that, you know, noise much more evident and will magnify the fact that we can see it, if you like. Sometimes you can use flash, you know, if you can do that, or studio lighting to give you more light. And of course, sometimes it could be a reflector, but you also could just say, you know what, there's not a lot I can do. I'm just going to denoise it. So that was a brief kind of set the scene for shutter speed. Any questions on ISO? Anything anyone doesn't understand, wants to know more about? God, you lot are quiet, aren't you? Oh, it makes a change from a normal Thursday.
Martin, can I just say that somewhere along the way, can't remember who or where, someone said, I think it was I was at Brands Hatch and there's a pro photographer there, and he advised me to turn the sharpening down in camera right down to 0 and actually minus it if I could. He said, because it'll just, you know, what it'll do if it's low light, it's just going to sharpen the noise and it'll be even more difficult to get you know, to get rid of it, to deal with it.
Yeah, for sure. And it's if you're shooting JPEG, that can be the case. If you're shooting RAW, it makes no difference because you can fix it afterwards. But without getting into editing, if you incorrectly sharpen every pixel in your picture, exactly as you say, you might as well paint a little white circle around every little blib you get, and the whole thing just becomes like snow. So turning it down can make a difference if you shoot JPEG. If you're shooting within the, you know, the capability of your camera, if you're shooting RAW, you can mask it in and out in Lightroom quite simply and easily. You know, very, very easily. Do you want me to show that quickly? Anyone? Yes, no?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll start Lightroom. Luckily I did it. I'm going to stop that for 1 second and I'm going to share Lightroom. Lightroom. Share. Look at that. And I was looking for pictures earlier. So let me find something that's obnoxiously horrible. That'll be good. Scotland. Here we go. Scotland. No, that's no good. I want those ones. I think, yeah, here we go. So these are all shot. Can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's find one with a stupidly high 2,500. Come on, there's got to be a faster one than that. Here we go. ISO 5,000. Can you all see my little birdie here?
Yeah.
It's looking really obnoxiously blurry, right? Not great. Way too much noise because I'm shooting at a very fast shutter speed. If I go into the develop module and I go into detail and I can sharpen that, and you'll notice it's been sharpened somewhat. Look at the grain. Do you see that as I sharpen that? Do you see how evident it's becoming here, how nasty and obnoxious and horrible it is? And that's because, you know, to Julie's point, we're turning it up. But we have this thing called masking, and this is the bit that your camera doesn't do and why it is so destructive. If I hit the Alt key and click mask, that is what is being sharpened. Everything that is white is where it is being sharpened. So if I slide into the right, do you see all those speckles? That's noise. So and now sharpening the noise, which makes it much more evident, much nastier and horrible to see. If I move that masking slowly and surely across to the right, about there is where it disappears. Notice the white lines are what I'm sharpening. So we're still sharpening the bird somewhat. And now we've lost a lot of that nastiness. But it's never going to be perfect because I got it wrong in the first place because I was shooting 1,250th of a second at ISO 5000. But you kind of get the point without doing any sort of sharpening. If I denoise it, I can actually take the noise out and it will make it better. Yeah. Have we got a better one that's a bit sharper?
Encouraging that you get it wrong too sometimes, Martin.
Oh, everyone does. Come on, everyone does. I mean, I knew what I was aiming for. I was trying to do birds in flight in the forest under a canopy, knowing that there's very little light there, and I'm pushing the boundaries of what the camera can do. And I'll hit denoise, and hopefully it's not going to break all the audio up and all that kind of stuff, because it's a bit of a resource hog.
Very slow.
Yeah, so it's no, this is, I mean, this, you can see it's doing it in pretty quick time, even running zoom, all the video and everything else. So straight away, if I go back to that sharpening again and masking, look, there's way less than there was before. And actually, if I stop masking there, before I had to go all the way over to like 80 or 90 and was losing all the detail. Notice how much feather detail is still preserved in the middle of the breast, and that's at 49. If I go to that one before, I do that. So this was the original, and I do the masking thing again. Look how bad it is. If I get to 49, there's a lot less detail and a lot more noise, where denoise has done such a nice job of cleaning it up. Look how nice that background is. And therefore we get
Martin on that. When you're using that greedy denoise, would it be a good idea to crop your image to what you want it to be before you use all that?
No, I always do that first.
Do it first. It won't make any difference if you cropped it slower.
No, the difference is minute, really. It's just, you might as well just bite the bullet. I will say, Lightroom, if you are doing denoise, it uses your GPU, so the graphics chip in here. If I do Task Manager, can you see this, or is it just a blank blob on your screen? Can you see my
like a square?
It's not on there. You're not sharing that at the moment.
All right, hang on, let me share my whole screen then. Share screen, screen one, share. So can you see this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I go to GPU 0, and it's bumbling along, it's not doing much. If I now say denoise, and I'm going to flick quick. So let's move that down so we can do enhance. Do you see suddenly it's leapt up? And it's that big spike, is it doing the denoise? And so it's all about using it in the GPU. The CPU is just fluttering along. At the moment, this is a combination of zoom, the videos going and everything else. But you saw for that GPU, that was when I did the denoise, it went bang, almost up.
A lot quicker than mine, mate.
Yeah, well, see, that's because I've got a big, fast GPU. Yeah. And so, I play games as well, so I don't mind investing in one. That will slow you down if you don't have an NVIDIA GPU in there, and you can see it do it. I will say the other good thing is things like import, preview building and export also use your GPU. So it can make a really big difference if you're, exporting 200 pictures, for an event or whatever. It makes it much faster. So, okay. So I will kill that. So does that make a bit more sense of noise, sharpening and masking to make sure that you don't do everything. So shooting JPEG sometimes, the sharpening can be quite challenging. But I would also say the converse of Julie's point is sometimes in-camera noise reduction is actually pretty good. So as long as that's turned on at the same time, sometimes that can help do it. But it doesn't do any of these fancy things that the new versions can do. For Topaz and Lightroom and those kind of things, it just doesn't have that horsepower inside your camera. So, there's always a trade-off there, yeah? So,
sorry, Martin, is there anything against having that turned on in your camera as opposed to not?
So, if you are shooting RAW, it's irrelevant.
Okay.
It's absolutely irrelevant. Oh God, can I draw really quickly? Annotate. Squiggly lines. So if that's your sensor, sorry, terrible thing. If you shoot RAW, right, that's what you get out. If you shoot JPEG, it goes out a different route, right? And there will be sharpening, lens correction, blah, 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 every other setting. Have you got it set to portrait? Have you got it set to, automatic, whatever? All those settings will be applied before it comes out of the camera. Whereas the RAW bypasses all of that junk, NRO and all those kind of things, so that, you've got the basic RAW data at the top rather than the camera sort of messing with it. And so, if you see in the old days, if you shot with the wrong picture style and you shot in JPEG and you shot, let's say, landscape, and you went into a studio and you left it on landscape boosts the blues and the greens. And so all of your portraits would then have this setting applied here, that would boost the blues and the greens. Well, that might ruin the portrait. But there's nothing you can do about it because what you've got there at the end, if you like, is cooked. It's had all those settings applied to it. There's not really a lot you can do to try and pull them out. Whereas if you're shooting in RAW, it's untouched. You can do whatever you want with it and you can set any setting you want afterwards.
So effectively,
Thanks, Martin.
JPEG, that raw information gets broken down into sections in a JPEG.
No, I can't type at the same time and do this.
What those things would be that you've got.
Those things, here we go. So can I get text? Where has my bloody mouse pointer gone? There we go. So that might be the style. Yeah, would be right. So that might be your picture style edit, right? This might be your sharpness setting. Yeah. The next one might be what other things will it set? Noise reduction might be one of those settings. White balance will be one of those settings. So each one of those settings that your camera has set are applied as you go through the processing of the JPEG before it spits it out at the end. Yes. Mm-hmm. So that's why when you say, as an example, I want to change the white balance on my RAW file, you can immediately do it to anything you want. Daylight, tungsten, whatever, in any of the editing programs. When you do try to do that in JPEG, you get auto or, what you've got as shot kind of thing, because you can't change it to the data, if that makes sense. So this is, if you like, the pure, untouched data. Yeah. And I know you're a musician, Mish. So this is your original recording up the top, and this is after it's been through the sound desk and the engineers messed around with it and gives you an edited tape. You can't re-edit it again quite so nicely. You really want the raw data. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why generally we say shoot raw, right? Yeah.
I tend to think about it like baking a cake.
Yeah.
If you've got your cake ingredients and they're always in the cupboard, that's your raw file. You've got your sugar, your margarine, your icing sugar, butter, flour, whatever, cocoa. They're always in that cupboard. That's your raw file.
Yeah.
And then you know, you bake the cake, you put it in the oven, and you mess it up. So shit, what do? Okay, so you go back to your raw file and you can make the cake again. But it's not the JPEG is like an automatic processing thing, whereas the
It's
raw
like a Betty
file
Crocker.
is your individual style of processing, rather than letting the JPEG just do it for you.
It's in your terms, Julie. It's a Betty Crocker mix. We can't
So
really
what?
check. It's a Betty Crocker mix. It's in a packet. It's all done, all mixed for you. There's nothing.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, none of that bullshit. Proper, proper ingredients. We're making a proper cake.
Yeah, and my analogy is normally cooking of lovely raw ingredients versus your microwave meal. It was what someone else decided. You can't really fix it. It is what it is, and you're kind of stuck with it. So, and that's why, in many ways, learning to do this stuff gives you the flexibility back to make sure that you've got the best possible raw ingredients to make your cake with. That's really what it's all about. So tonight was really about shutter, and this was kind of to set the scenes. But I've got to turn that stupid thing off. Kill my drawings. Let's get rid of annotate. There we go. So, all right. So we know we can mess around a bit with ISO. We know there are some risks to do so, but it does give us some flexibility. And what we're really talking about is first of, shall we call it, our creative settings, where we now want to make a difference in the pictures we take by leveraging what this does to our pictures. So, of course, the faster the shutter speed, the less light you get onto the sensor. So in my analogy there of that picture I showed you in the woods, underneath the tree canopy, with very, very diffuse, very soft, low light, trying to shoot up at 1,000th of a second is going to be pretty tough, right? Maybe I need to be shooting at a 1/30th of a second to let more light in, but that may not be the picture I want. And we're going to get to why, how, what, and when in a minute. So the physics of the amount of light you're sort of stuck with on the day you're there. You might go back on a brighter day. You might go back on a dimmer day. If it's a super bright, harsh, nasty day, that might get in the way of what you're trying to achieve. And the reality, of course, generally is the faster your shutter speed, the less likely you are to have any kind of blur. And when I say any kind of blur, I mean motion blur, camera, your hands moving the camera around, so camera shake, or just you've got such a slow shutter speed, you've got a combination of subject motion, camera and lens motion as you're wiggling about, and if you happen to be standing on a boat, that might get in the way as well. So you've always got to balance what it's all about, and why do we care? What makes the difference if I get the shutter speed wrong? It could be that if you're shooting in manual, it'll be too dark or too bright, because you still only always have the amount of light that you've got. It could be that the image is not going to be sharp because then it's moving too fast. That bird's flying through the air, or the dog's running along the beach, whatever it happens to be. But it could be if you're doing macro underneath a bush and your camera's wiggling about all over the place because you're not holding it still. That wrong, slow shutter is going to cause all kinds of issues. If you underexpose, we could be seeing noise, a little bit later. And it might, the wrong shutter might be not the image I was trying to get. And that's where the creativity of the shutter starts to come into what we actually achieve. And that's kind of where we're going to go after this bit, is what does that mean? What do we get? How do we get there? What do we do with it? And of course, your correct shutter, if you get it right, you'll get your exposure correct if you're in manual with, manual ISO and manual f-stop. It is more likely to mean that you actually get a sharp shot that you want. With a flexibility of look in the image based on the creativity, Peter talked about what you wanted earlier. You know, what is it you're trying to do with your picture? Because if you're not thinking about it, if you're not thinking about what is it, what's happening, why does it matter, how does movement affect the shot I'm trying to do, you may or may not achieve what you see in your mind's eye. And Mish, I know you're very good at that, sort of visualizing what you want. The question is, does the science get in the way? So I just wanted to show a couple of examples. I was doing Cowboys on Saturday, and Lloyd did it after me. It was actually quite a giggle. You know, and these gentlemen, the one on the right, very kindly is standing quite still. You know, it's an 80th of a second. I put that in the middle of the picture so everyone could see it. But our gentleman on the left there just raised his hand as I pressed the shutter. Is that a nice look? Do we like that hand? It's not really sort of blurry movement. It's not really sharp. Does it look like a mistake, or does it look like I meant that? Anyone?
I suppose if there was more of him blurred, it would look like it was meant to be, but as it's just his hand.
It's not enough, is it?
No.
And that's intention and you know, setting goes together. And that's where, you know, you might exactly say to that point, Mish, I want you to do this, but I'm going to use the right shutter speed to get what I want. You know, it could be sometimes, you know, if it's a hummingbird, 1/640th of a second, not a cat's chance in hell of getting a hummingbird still. You know, it's moving too much. So, you know, you're really not going to get the look that you want out of this if you're not using the right ones, because often subject blur or your blur can kind of get in the way. So what can we do? What are the things that we think? So, you know, what do you guys think? What could we do if we think, you know, we're going to have to use a slow shutter? What could we do?
Up the ISO.
You could up your ISO. Yeah. Anything else?
Put the camera on a tripod.
Yeah, perfect. Camera on a tripod.
Or lower the aperture, I guess.
Change your aperture. Yeah, you could do that. Anything else?
On the Nikon, you can, I don't know what it's called, but you can change it to continuous like movement. So you put it on S if it's static, or you put it on C if there's subjects moving around.
Yeah,
I don't know what that's called, but
yeah, it's really that's autofocus. That's a bit further down the line. But if it's moving, swaying backwards and forwards, or you are, actually that can make a difference to sharpness as you move, your camera keeps focusing. So, you know, if you were on a boat or something like that, or you're standing on something that's a bit wobbly, as you're trying to hold your camera steady, absolutely you could be focusing in and out, you know, whether that's continuous or a single shot. That would make a difference for sure. Anything else?
How about chucking more light at it?
Oh yeah, use a flash gun. Yeah, put a big studio light on it, reflector, open the curtains, you know, whatever. Anything else?
No.
Tripod, faster shutter, lean on something. Can you lean against the lamppost if, you know, to give you a bit of extra support? You know, turn on IBIS. Have you got your in-body image stabilization turned on? Do you have a lens with stabilization? Could you turn that on? Now, of course, that might help you moving, but if it's a hummingbird flitting about, like, it's not going to make any difference, is it? Beanbag in a hide, put it on a soft beanbag, maybe, you know, just put it on a wall, put it on a 2-second shutter, and you know, take your hand away from, you know, moving it as you press the shutter. Body as a tripod. Everybody know that one? How to use your elbows into your ribs, hold it steady.
Don't they suggest if you've got your camera on a tripod that you turn off the IBIS?
Yes.
Yes.
Depends. Not necessarily true. Some older cameras, yes. Some older lenses, yes. Other more modern ones don't give a rat's what's it about whether it is or not. So
Right.
yeah,
Right.
but it can.
Why does that make a difference, please?
So because it's expecting movement, it's looking for it, and so it actually starts kind of getting in the way of the fact that the tripod is super still. So it's going, what's going on? Why? And and it will actually make your shot blurrier.
Yeah.
But something like a modern Z, you know, any of the new Z cameras or the RF cameras or whatever, it just says, I'm not detecting any movement. I must be on a tripod. Oh, I gotta turn off then. And so they're much more smart about managing that for you. But yeah, good comment.
I've got one. As well as holding your elbows in, take a deep breath and hold your breath.
Yeah. Do the sniper thing, breathe out. You know, don't be going, you know, as you're trying to take.
I always shake more when I try that.
Sorry?
What's that?
When I try and do that.
You have what?
I said I shake more when I try and do that.
So sometimes breathe out. So some people, if you breathe in and hold it, that can be harder. Breathe out, pause, take the picture, breathe back in again. It's all sniper technique. So yeah, absolutely perfect.
And pressing the shutter button carefully as well.
Well,
you know,
burst mode.
Yeah.
I was teaching a friend of mine and Terry's, and I stood next to him. Stand next to someone and just surreptitiously next time watch the end of their lens as they press the shutter.
It's like you, Mish.
Yeah, look, the whole camera goes like that. Stab.
Yeah.
Gentle, soft, hold it nicely. But often, if you did a burst, click, 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 click. The first one is where you're pressing and moving the camera as you're pressing the shutter button. And then, of course, you hold it just for a second and it goes click, click, click. And then you let go and move the camera again. But in the middle there, one or two of them might be a bit more sharp. Sometimes worth a try in really horrible light where you know I'm going to try everything to get the shot. Wait for more light, or to Peter's point, introduce some light, put your flash gun on or whatever. So there are ways you can manage it. There are, you know, ways to do things. So I guess the question is, will these always help?
Combination of or any one depending on the circumstances.
Yeah. Is that always going to work though?
Well, not 100%, is it?
No. And you know, if it's a kingfisher diving and it's, you know, and you need 1/4000th of a second, and it's a horrible, lovely English summer day when you're at, you know, 1/250th of a second, ISO, you know, 1600 shooting at f2.8, because there's just no light there and you can't put a flash gun on. You know, sometimes you're going to have to just suck it up and do what you can to hold it as, you know, still as you can, all those kind of things, but it's never going to be 100%. So, you know, take a few shots at it. Don't just take one and walk away and hope it works. You know, if you take 4 or 5, hopefully one of them will be better than another one. And the classic, and I'll use this as an example, is the stags early in the morning at Bushy Park. You know, we turn up there at 6 a.m. It's pitch black. The light is just starting to come in. You point your camera at a stag and you notice that it's 1/40th of a second, you know, ISO 3200, 4000, you know, you're shooting at f2.8. What can you do? Wait for it to bellow and hold itself still, because they tend to do that, you know, and they sort of almost pause and go and take 4 or 5, and hopefully one of them will be okay, because you can't do all the things that you want to do. You know, you can't shoot 1/1000th of a second at f8 and, you know, all that, because there'll be too much noise for it to be useful. So it won't always help, but if you can use as many of these things as possible, you're more likely to get the shot. And this is why, and this is an example, right? So it's shot at same focal length, same thing, all no difference. The only difference is the shutter speed. So the one on the left's pretty sharp, right? One on the right, not so much. You know, and it was 5/100th of a second versus a 30th, and it was swaying in the breeze. So, you know, your camera moves as you move it, the lens goes up and down, you know, you do all those kind of things. You can become your own worst enemy for, you know, creating all of that. And, you know, people talk about this, you know, 1 over the focal length. So on a, you know, 400mm lens, you should be shooting a 400th of a second, 500th, but you know what I mean, to give you a fast enough shutter speed to manage it. But on a crop sensor, you might need to add that into it. So a Nikon will be 1.5, a Canon will be 1.6, or you know, an Olympus might be 2 times. But that doesn't include in-body stabilization, lens stabilization, and it really comes down to you learning to practice to be as still as you can be and hold the camera as steadily as you can. And then you can start to break the rules again, like everything else in photography, you know, the rule of thirds and all those kind of things. They're all there meant to be broken and meant to give you the ability to, you know, be a little bit more creative in what you do. So that's all the sort of downsides of why and what and how. Any questions on that before we sort of get onto the creative piece? All made sense? Everybody gets it?
Yeah.
Good.
Not,
And
not,
it's,
so
you
much,
know,
not so much a question, more an observation. So I was helping this old fella, Jim, and he couldn't get sharp shots, and his shutter speed was, you know, you would think for the focal length of the lens, it should have done the trick, but he actually needed to up his shutter speed a bit more than the focal length of the lens because of, you know, because he was just not very stable.
No, and for those of you who remember Bob, Bob used to be a member. He had that same problem. You know, his hands shook, so he's always, you know, much harder to hold it straight for him. And the other thing that was kind of interesting, it's not quite so bad now. Things like the Nikon 800 when it came out, that was terrible for actually the shutter mechanism bouncing the camera because they're such high megapixels. Any tiny little movement makes it worse. So high megapixel cameras suffer generally worse from this kind of effect of any kind of movement in there than a low pixel does, because the density and the size of the pixels is so much, they're much tighter and they're much smaller, so it kind of comes out worse. But it's the new ones seem to be much better at not causing quite so much of an issue. So it's finding, and I think the point is find your sweet spot, know what works for you. And I know I'm pretty damn good at getting shots at a 40th of a second, you know, and slower even on big long lenses, as long as the subject isn't flitting about or moving, because that you can't do anything with that. So apart from, of course, being creative, and we'll kind of talk about that in the next section. So yeah, thank you, Julie. So why do we care? Why is shutter speed one of those interesting creative things that we can do? Because you can do stuff like this, and everyone will prefer, do we like the one on the left? Do we like the one on the right? Do we like the one in the middle? And some people will like the one on the right, some people the one in the middle, and there's no wrong or right answer. It's about using the effect that the shutter speed gives to create this sort of effect. And I mean, so what does anyone like? Anybody, which one do you like?
I like them all, depending on
Depends what you want, yeah.
I like the ones with a bit of movement.
Middle.
130 probably is my favourite.
Yeah, okay, why do you like that, Simon?
Well,
is the bit you like?
I like the fact that it's showing movement and it's something that is moving. But the mathematician in me likes the kind of the symmetry and seeing the 6 separate sort of sections to it.
Yeah. Okay. Is the one in the middle or the one on the left more exciting and interesting? Anyone?
The one in the middle.
Middle, I think. Yeah.
Oh, it's more exciting.
So,
Yeah.
nothing wrong. Yeah, nothing wrong with the static one. It's all right. It's fine. You know, it's nicely exposed. It's all very detailed and lovely and everything. But I think if you can bring a bit of movement, if you can bring a bit of blur, a bit of energy, should we call it, or a little bit of your creative juices, if you like, create just something a little bit more interesting than something very static. And I should have put more bad examples in here. Before I send the slides out, I'll put a couple of bad ones in for sure. So what could you do to manipulate your shutter? What can you do to make it, you know, give you, you know, a change in shutter?
The plus minus exposure on the actual camera.
Yeah, you could use, I didn't put that in. You could exposure compensate, and that will change, the things. And it's really about reducing the ISO or increasing it, or the f-stop. Those are the sort of, that's where we start to get creative. And the one I think for shutter manipulation, and the classic is like an air show, is a lot of people shoot in shutter priority, or if you're a Canon person, TV mode, time value. God knows why it's called that, but it's shutter priority. Some people shoot in manual with auto ISO and all those kind of things. But the idea is that we're going to use the shutter speed to create the excitement or the interest in the picture that we're doing. So, I mean, the first one, it's panning. It's very easy to get a very fast shutter speed picture, and I should have put one in here, or a motorbike, and it might as well be sat there on the pegs, right? Because it's not exciting. It's all still, frozen, not going anywhere, and we don't have any kind of sense of speed. Whereas this, we're following the camera, with the subject kept as much as possible in exactly the same point in the frame. So you don't want to be wiggling your camera up and down. You don't want to be going too fast or too slow. You want your lens to exactly follow the bike, the car, the push bike, the whatever it is that you're panning. And we use a slow shutter. Why do we use the slow shutter?
Create blur.
Blur in the background.
Blur the background, yeah.
Because the background whizzes past as you click the shutter rather than click. So that background gets a lovely sense of movement. And on a normal day, you don't need any sort of specialist equipment with this. You probably would put your ISO low. So, ISO 100 or something like that. And then because you're moving your camera, do we care if you shot this at f8 or, f5.6? Would it make a difference in the final picture?
No.
Because the background's blurry because it's moving.
Yeah.
So we can go to a narrower aperture, f8, f11, to restrict the amount of light to allow me to drop my shutter speed. And that means that then that blurry background, the slower I can go, the blurrier it will be, because the more I'm moving it with the bike. Does that make sense for everyone?
Yeah.
Cool. And it's much more interesting and exciting. I will say, I do still think that's a boring picture. It's technically fine, but I don't find it exciting. I think because there's almost no human connection there. It's one of those, it's much nicer with sports, and I think, things like that. And I'll use Julie as a good example. Her rugby shots, it's all about the facial expressions of being hit, trying to tackle someone or whatever that creates the excitement. But certainly a panned motorcycle is much more interesting than a static, and the classic with judges is things like airplanes and propellers and those kind of things. And they say, where's the little bit of wire hanging from the ceiling? Because it just doesn't look like it's moving at all. It's like, it could be a model one. So talking about propellers and moving, and this is where things get really quite challenging, you could do something like a hummingbird and get the blur of the wings, or it could be the blur of the propeller on an airplane, or a cog on a machine, or anything else, that if we can get that sense of movement and you get your shutter speed right, you can give a sense of it being there or really blurry, because you can absolutely do that sort of slower shutter. But of course, if it's moving all ways in all directions, it isn't necessarily going to give you something exciting, because I think everything becomes blurry, and therefore it isn't necessarily quite so exciting. Does that make sense? I think we need.
I disagree. I've got lots of things that are blurry. They're exciting.
Can be. No. it's got to be the right thing to be completely blurry and streaky and those kind of things. And things like, as an example, and I'll use Simon as an example with the horses, trying to pan a horse to keep the head of the horse and the rider sharp while the legs are blurring and the background's going, that really gets kind of difficult, but delightfully wonderful. Sometimes some of the things swirling around where, you know, everything is blurry, if we get a sense or we know what it is or can connect with it mentally, can be equally as interesting or exciting, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Yeah, I've seen a couple of those recently with Peter's one was cycling, and there was a squash one, wasn't there? I think Alison did.
One,
Was
yeah,
great.
Alison, well, yeah, squash.
That was cracking because it gave a sense of movement, and therefore, you know, we knew what it was. Our brains could connect with the subject, but you absolutely got a sense of the movement, etc. The one on the hummingbird here, the reason I was also playing with it is because, of course, it's raining in the background.
Yeah.
And the different shutter speeds do different things to the rain. And that's a really fun experiment to try different settings to see how much movement you can get in the rain, or how much of a streak, or how much does it start to disappear because it's moving too quickly for your shutter to really register. So yeah, a lot of these are about experimenting and trying different kinds of settings. Yeah. You might want a fast shutter, you know, Mr. Is it Joe Clark or whatever his name is?
It is Joe Clark, yeah.
Yeah, Mr. You know, grin and bear it. You know, it's all about freezing the water. Do we want or could we get any blur or anything in there? I'm not convinced we could. I think that would be quite difficult. Might be another one of those if you went so super blurry that it became almost like a caricature of itself. That might be quite, you know, intriguing. And of course, the bird in fly. This one, I would argue, is it as exciting as it would be if it had a little bit of blur in the wings? And I think because it's just taking off, we probably get away with it a little bit. But Peter, you're a judge. Wing blur, yes or no?
I think normally yes, but I think that one looks really nice with the.
It's detailed. I like the detail.
Peter, in general, yes, no?
It very much depends on the subject and everything else, actually. In this case, the bird, I would be very happy to accept it as it is. And
okay.
I don't really want any blur.
Okay.
But,
yeah, no.
But yeah, some of them, because you're not expecting the wing to be moving that fast on that bird.
Yes.
A bird is different. It's and a bee and the various insects which have very fast wing speed. You sort of expect them to be blurred because you can't see them anyway.
Yeah. No, and I think having a good grasp and an understanding of that gives you a good sense of what you can show, or what would work or what wouldn't work necessarily in kind of a competition. But I mean, all these things, hopefully you can sort of manage without extra equipment. We're going to get to extra equipment in a minute, but you know, ICM, everyone done a bit of that. I cheated a bit on this one. It's a bit of a ICM and a bit of a not ICM at the same time. It's two in one. And this is where trying to be a little bit more creative, or trying to do something with the shutter speed, works. So this one actually was a 13th of a second, with me, you know, moving my camera down as I press the shutter, or up or sideways, or you know, try all different kinds of things to get that intentional camera movement, because we should define that, shouldn't we? Not everyone might know what ICM stands for, but I didn't like what it did to the bluebells. So I actually took two pictures and blended them together because I liked the sense of the movement and the streakiness of the trees, but I didn't like it in the foreground. So I kind of put two together. It might not be
better, Martin.
Sorry?
I think that works better than what you've done.
Thank you, John.
I think it needs that. Otherwise, it's just movement.
Yeah, sometimes it can be too much, but it's a balance. And I think some people have done like horizontal with the beach, the waves, and the sky. And sometimes you don't want anything in that. It's just a lovely sense of those dreamy colours and streaks. But I just tried something different, and I think some people will like it, some not so. I don't know. I mean, it's just to try something different. But if I hadn't have done an ICM, it would have just been the bluebells and the trees, and it might not have been particularly exciting.
I think you need a deer appearing around a tree, actually.
Oh yeah, I often say, we need a person in a red coat, someone with an umbrella.
It's funny you should say that, because I've got 2 or 3 like that.
Yeah, a unicorn, a white hart, to really, and it's kind of is a bit of an empty set, isn't it? And we can joke, and it's part of it, I think. Everybody wants different things. Everybody sort of wants to try and do something. And I think that's good. We should try to experiment. It isn't just about competitions and what judges want, for sure. But all this kind of stuff gives you, different things, different ways to do things, and hopefully some alternatives to a static picture that once you've done that, I haven't put it in here, but I did a whole bunch of zoom bursts. Everyone done a zoom burst?
Mm-hmm.
Take a picture while you're zooming the lens at the same time. That can be quite fun.
Oh yeah,
that works quite interestingly, I felt, for this kind of subject. It's quite interesting. So there's lots of ways to add a little bit of creativity in, and I felt all these you probably could do without any sort of extra equipment. You probably could just do it with your camera and the lens, and just by manipulating your settings. But then there's some other things that you can do. So high-speed flash. Anyone ever done that? Use multiple flash guns. Peter?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah. Terry and I spent about half an hour messing around with 2 plastic wine glasses, blue liquid in one, red liquid in the other one, trying to smash them together so that the water splashed everywhere.
Oh.
And it was never sharp. It was always just a tiny little bit blurry. And so I went off and researched, and the moral of the story was use multiple flash guns at lower power and you'll get a better result. So I put 4 flash guns in instead of 1 or 2, I think I might have had, turned the power right down, and the duration of the flash is so fast that actually it's way faster than any possible shutter speed you could set, and therefore you're more than likely to freeze the movement. And therefore, using sort of very high speed things like hummingbirds, bats, some people do it for water droplets. Water droplets is always better with a flash gun either side, and using it that way, sort of, almost like this. And we were doing this, for the hummingbirds, really, really low shutter speed, 1/125th, f8. Everything should be blurry as hell. You can't shoot a hummingbird at 1/125th. But if you've got all these flash guns going pop, and when they pop, the more that you've turned the power up, the longer the pop is, the slower, the blurrier the subject. So when you've got all of these set up super, super fast, very, very low power, the pop is absolutely way faster. Back to here again. If you're on 1/32 of a power, that would be the equivalent, right, of this is, I think, a standard Canon flash. So the duration of the pop is 1/21,000th of a second. Has anyone got a camera that's got a shutter speed that's 1/21,000? Mine does 8,000. I noticed some of the newer cameras now actually can do higher than that. I think mine will do 1/64,000th of a second. I think you'd need an awful lot of light for that to work. But, so this duration is tiny. So even though your shutter is open for a long amount of time, the actual flash that lights the subject is very, very, very fast and tiny. And hence you end up with stuff like this, where, the creature itself is absolutely frozen solid. There's like no movement in that wing at all, you know, anywhere. In fact, there is still a tiny little amount of movement on that left-hand side, probably actually the depth of it moving backwards and forwards. So, you know, you can do it, but it takes a setup. It's very difficult to do. Normally you would have like a static kind of subject of some kind, like water droplets, or a setup like this where you're attracting birds to a feeder. And I've seen people do it in their back garden to freeze, you know, birds in flight, tits and those kind of things, because the English weather's so rubbish, they can't get a fast enough shutter speed. Of course, at that point, you've got to hope it doesn't tip it down the rain on top of all your expensive flash gear out there in the garden, but it can be done. And sometimes we want to go the other way. We don't want super fast. Sometimes we want to do a long shutter speed. You know, we're going to be on a tripod. We're probably going to have a remote release of some kind, whether it's a cable, whether it's a, you know, electronic-y kind of thing. And you want to be able to reduce the light dramatically. And that's where things like polarizers, ND filters, as often they get called, neutral density filters. You know, some people screw them onto the lens. Some of them rotate and will give you a variable neutral density. And some of them, like the ones on the bottom here, like a Lee filter system or whatever, it's a piece of glass, like a bit of welding glass that you put in the front of the lens. And that will give you, you know, 10 stops, you know, or more. There are lots of apps out there that you can use to, you know, Photopills, Lee do one for their 6, 10 and 15 stopper. Sometimes you can put multiple ones together. And the whole idea of it is that you end up with something like this, where, you know, the water is blurred, the clouds are starting to give that lovely sort of streaky effect in the sky, to give something a little bit more creative than, you know, just click, there it is. And of course, yes, this is with a tripod. Yes, it's with a filter system and what have you to kind of get there. And I think this is about a 30th of a second or something like that. But we happen to be in Brighton, and it was midday, and I wanted to do one of these. So this was a 220-second exposure at midday of the pier. And I will say the gull did sit there. It's not added in afterwards. It literally sat there, and that's why it's there. But its head is a little bit blurrier than its body, probably because it was looking left to right, which was a bit annoying. And the reason that this worked at 220 seconds is because it's a 10-stop filter and a 15-stop filter put in front of the camera all in one go to get a slow enough shutter to get there, which is kind of extreme, but it just kind of shows. And the question is, do we like it this way, or actually what happens if you do it at 2 seconds? And you blur the waves and just give that sense of the draw. You take the picture just as the wave starts to draw back. I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer. It's just which style did you like? Which one did you want the most? You know.
That's more creative, I think.
Any comment? People prefer one or the other, or?
I like them both for different reasons, I think.
Yeah.
They're very different, aren't they? But it's pretty much the same spot. You know, I've cropped most of the waves out because it was too, you know, swirly and what have you, but it's pretty much exactly the same, and it's just sort of cropped at this point to remove this out of it. But they're very different, aren't they? And you know, both taken at midday in super bright sunlight on Brighton, you know, so you do what you can, and you could make the sort of most of it. I think we're nearly at the end. It's hard to know how much you should have put in or could have put in without blowing everyone's brains out. So, you know, I just gave some sort of examples. They're starting points, because it does depend on, you know, kingfishers diving, a 4,000th of a second, you're probably going to need to be up there or thereabouts, but you might get away with something a little bit, you know, less than that. Birds in flight, owls and those kind of things, you can get away with something much slower because they fly slower. So these are all designed to give you a starting point that if you're not sure, you know, start having a go, try a few of them, you know, see where you get to with it. Because I don't think there is any one answer for any sort of one style. It's find the one that you like, try the different sort of settings that work for you. Make kind of sense. You know, slow shutter equals motion blur, you know, good or bad, or of course camera shake if you're not very good at holding it. Faster shutter can freeze the motion, not always desirable, sometimes a good thing to do, and other times maybe a bit less creative if you're going to sort of blur anything, you know. The one over the focal length when you zoom sort of right in is probably a good guide, but also can restrict your ability to be creative in what you're trying to achieve with subject blur or motion blur. Crop factor, of course, can make a difference, you know, if how long your lens is. I know some of the Olympus folks are now shooting with, like, you know, 150 400s, so they're effectively shooting 800 millimeters, and that's a long old distance. And of course IBIS can help, but I think it's sort of practice really is really where it's at. What you can handhold and what works for you is always going to kind of be the thing. So any questions? Did we miss anything? Does anyone want to go over anything? And then I've got one more slide, which is everyone's homework.
Ooh, homework.
Oh yeah. Because the point of this is you actually go and practice and try it. And next week will be, or next time we do it in a couple of weeks, we are gonna have a look at people's pictures and talk about what worked, what didn't work, because we want the successes and the failures, and we'll come to that in a minute. But I mean, is that enough to get everyone going? Should we have been more detailed, less detailed?
I think it was just about right.
Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's excellent.
Just about right.
Yeah.
It's always so hard. And I will say that the quality of the photographers on here, I sort of do feel a bit like teaching grandma to suck eggs sometimes. But, so your homework, and we'll give you about 3 weeks for this probably. I'll put a date in the diary. Go shoot a minimum of 2 pictures, and it's going to be a minimum. We'll send the slides out so everyone will get a copy of it. Freeze something fast, blur something. And when I say that, I mean, be creative, do something interesting that we wouldn't normally see. Try something out of your comfort zone. Try different settings, see which works, which doesn't work, which ones you think, oh, I really like that one. Oh, maybe that one's not so nice. And then please email them to me. You know, everyone should have my address. If not, I'll give it to everyone, because I will anonymize the pictures so that no one feels defensive. No one has to explain what it was, but include what were you trying to do? What were the settings that you used that you felt were the most successful? And maybe, if you can, send me one that you think that just didn't work, or I couldn't get it right, or I just found it didn't give me a good result. Because I think the whole point of all of this is to learn from each other, not just, you know, well, that was perfect, thank you, I'm sort of done. You know, back to Julie's cake making. I tried that and it didn't quite come out as well as I would have liked. It all sagged in the middle or whatever. Is that fair to ask everyone to do? Please do. It's very easy to just...
Yeah, good idea.
Have a go, do something you've never done before, you know, do a car driving by, you know, or get a, you know, Newton's cradle, indoors, outdoors, flash photography, anything you like. There is no bad idea for this. And let's see if we can get, you know, 20 pictures for us to discuss next time, so that we can have a look, decide what worked, what didn't, you know, what we might have done. The author can jump in and say, yeah, this is what I was trying to do if they like, but they'll all be anonymous so that nobody feels like they're, oh, I didn't get it right, or I struggled with it. Because the point is to struggle. The point is to try things that you may not have done before, so we can have a play and a look.
Yeah, sounds good.
Any questions? He says.
When we do that homework, Martin, are you just straight out of camera shots and you know, as they are.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Don't worry about editing them and making them perfect and all
Yeah.
those kind of things. We're really sort of about the learning of the setting of the camera, what works, what doesn't. Those are the important things. Not to spend 4 hours in Photoshop fixing it. We just, you know, shoot in JPEG if you want, shoot in RAW if you want. Doesn't matter. Fire it over to me, and we'll put it together in a presentation, and we'll have a talk about what works, what doesn't, what people have done, what they've tried. You know, because there's no wrong or right answers. It's all part of the fun of learning together, I think is the point.
Okay. Yeah.
And it saves me writing another presentation, which I'll have to do for the next one for Aperture, although I've got a lot of that. But cool.
Brilliant. Really good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Martin.
Thanks very much, Martin.
Really
Brilliant.
good.
Thank you very much.
I'll
Okay.
put this on YouTube again so that everyone can have a look. I'll put the slides in a handout again, and I'll put those on the Facebook page. Last sessions were, I did the same, the YouTube link, and they're in the files of the Camera Club Facebook group so that everyone could get at them. They're too big to sort of send out everywhere. I think even the movie file for this is something like 140 meg or something, and Facebook just goes, you're not posting that, it's too big. So that's why I just chucked on the YouTube, because it made it easier to do. But yeah, thank you for the engagement, all of you. There's no right, wrong. You know, my way is not the only way. You know, jump in if you know something. It does make it for a better session. Thank you for the engagement. Enjoy the rest of your week, and I guess I'll see you in a couple of days for the best of the best, which is going to be always interesting. And let's see if the dog wins it again.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
No, thank you all.
Thanks, Martin.
Thanks, Martin.
Martin.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Martin.
Take care. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.